Okay, so coming back to this question of why wake up, and starting with the question we were asking before, why subject yourself to pain and choose a reality with darkness? But the interesting thing here is the awake one asking this, or is it the asleep one, right? Think about that same question from both points of view, because it actually goes both ways. So consider for a moment how each of these groups, awake and asleep, is seeing the other as we get into this whole question. To the awake one, what's an asleep person, right? An asleep person is someone who's depressed, lonely, confused, speaking here in broad strokes, right? Doesn't know what world they're living in, and it's sort of this idea of being bombarded with emotions, as kind of depicted by that photo there. Bombarded by emotions that you really can't process and can't understand and don't actually have the tools to understand given where you are. And then also the idea of tons and tons of people in a crowded place surrounded by commercialism, things like that. But to the asleep one, which might be interesting to kind of consider, depending on how often you've thought about this, there's this notion of solitude for sure. Somebody who wants to be alone, who needs to be alone to kind of, work out all their ideas and doesn't want to be a part of society. And, maybe they have a lighthouse quality to them, someone who's kind of up on a hill or fancies that they're up on a hill, but they're really just kind of out on their own in a wasteland. So sort of regardless of whether they actually know something accurate or not, it doesn't really matter because there's someone who's chosen so much kind of intensity and an overbearing sense of needing to figure all this crap out. It's sort of that kind of a picture, I think. So all this can really go both ways, can it? There are ideas that each of these groups has about the other one. And here, it's interesting to consider which picture in these two would be awake and which would be asleep. So regular people, looking at these two side by side. I think to the awake person, obviously, well, don't you want to choose a world of light and hope and possibility? And you want to be on the left one, and the right one is this world of suffering and apocalyptic, or God forbid, this kind of a thing. That's obviously the kind of asleep world where people haven't been able to self-actualize properly, and then civilization just collapses, right? But to the asleep person, the left is, well, hold on. I just get up in the morning, go outside. I see something that looks like on the left. I just see my world outside my bedroom. This is the world I'm choosing to live in. This is what I see. The right is all this stuff you're trying to scare me with all the time and make me think that, oh, everything's so terrible, and make me think there are conspiracies and somebody's out to get me. Why do I want to be on the right side when I have what actually I see, which is on the left, right? So that's interesting. If it seems as though certain shortcuts are being taken here, or I'm mischaracterizing something, I'm saying just set that aside for now, because what we're doing right here is an exercise in empathy. Okay, so where do we go from here? Well, remember, we have manifesting power. Our consciousness does decide things. And consider for a moment that people, even asleep people, actually have all the information, as radical as that thought might sound. That they know everything, they perceive everything, because we are all actually sensitive beings. This idea of an aura that can contain information, as information comes from the world, from the cloud, from the real information cloud, not the 21st century remodeled, quote unquote, Apple computer cloud or something, but the actual information cloud of everything out there as we seem to experience it. What if that information is actually hitting everybody, awake or asleep? In other words, what I'm saying is, put aside for now the notion of regular people as being basically unaware, in the dark, even asleep, actually, just dumb, forget that kind of characterization, but, what we can say is they are people who have chosen to keep the information outside of their consciousness. So they don't know about this stuff, obviously, consciously. They don't think about this stuff consciously, but the information is still hitting them somehow, right? Psychology, spirituality, all these other fields we know of have for a long time now viewed the human mind as containing different layers. That's sort of a given here. And we have the conscious and subconscious, unconscious, whatever you want to call it. You can go, as high as you want, making distinctions and all these different categories. But essentially, if we're talking about what a person knows and what they don't actually know, right, we're talking about a conscious and then something deeper. So something is either known in the head, or the idea here being it's kept in the body and in the aura instead. Unraveling the ways in which we keep ourselves from knowing certain things is a subject into itself. And this is really getting fascinating here because, thinking about it rather than thinking, oh, regular asleep people, they don't know all these things. Think of it as they're preventing themselves from knowing, or they're not actually letting it get all the way up into the conscious mind. You could even say that separation of knowing like this into various levels is some part of creation, all of creation at the outlet, what seems to be a lot of creation at the outset. But that's going to be a whole other subject. So what about the notion of separating information into conscious and subconscious types? So that's what we're coming down to here. Where's that coming from? And I'm going to introduce this idea of the membrane, as I call it. That's a speaker membrane. But what I'm talking about is the membrane as a frontier or an interface that decides what goes in and what doesn't. Deciding what's called permeability. Is the membrane permeable or not, right? Or just case by case, does a piece of information get through this membrane or doesn't it? And a door or gate, as we see there, would also decide what information goes past the aura and the sensitivity fields and gets admitted to the conscious. So information either getting past this pretty blue gate, pretty blue door, or not getting admitted past there, right? And that process, as we're saying, imagine what if it's an intelligent process? It's actually not stupid at all. It's extremely intelligent, and it has to be because it has such a big job that it has to do. And maybe even to illustrate this, think of this as being sort of an approximately human type of system that's separating the information into what you want to know and what you don't. You could even think of it as a security guard at your local mall who's in charge of the security for that door, deciding what information goes through and what doesn't. Or a whole team dedicated to carrying out these metaphysical orders that you're making on your own parts somehow, of what information comes in and what doesn't. This whole busy team, what's going on over there? Is she going to get to know about this or not? Or, an office environment even, to illustrate this. These are what we're talking about, the gatekeepers that are defining your conscious reality, however you want to imagine these people. This idea of a kind of business team or something is kind of a fun idea just as a thought experiment, what we're going with here. This idea of, oh, should we tell him, a certain piece of information is coming up to the gate? Does he know about it? He being the conscious mind we're dealing with. Probably not. What are they using to make these decisions, though? Well, it would be some kind of a rule book or user's manual. These people manning the gate, so to speak, manning the membrane, deciding what you know and what stays in your aura, in your body, out of your conscious. They're using some kind of a guidebook, right? That you can think of considering a human as a whole level of consciousnesses, which we tend to do, considering all these constituents together, we would actually say you have created this rule book. You have created this user's manual that's determining what you know consciously and what you don't. The membrane uses these rules to determine what the conscious mind gets to know and what it doesn't get to know, right? Sort of like matrix code, if you want to go to that level. And another interesting way to look at it, does the matrix code get converted into real thoughts, real reality, real understanding in the conscious mind, or does the code get tucked over here to the side? Information can be accepted, as we're saying, or it can be rejected. So either the key fits into the lock or the lock stays on, case by case by case. An example of stuff that, we would say asleep people would let through the gate. Oh, it's a nice day out. I should talk to my boss. All these things, I need to do something with my kids, hang out with my kids. I need to, go to the store, and deeper questions too, thoughts about, life and what I love and all kinds of things, but probably not stuff on the order of real hardcore intuition in general, but, the way we would probably want to define asleep and awake. And stuff like a global conspiracy, things like this, probably not making it past the gate. But don't immediately think of all this as the individual being in denial over what's manifestly true in the world. That's sort of a point I'm trying to stress here. So don't think of it as, oh, they're in denial. And this is where we're going to connect to what we were saying in the previous video. Think of the membrane as actually putting you in a whole different world. This is where the world aspect comes in and it starts to get quite interesting, right? That's how these different energy fields that we're dealing with might work, right? The membrane is actually carrying out what the person desires on a world's level. The membrane isn't just deciding what information goes in, what information stays out. The membrane's deciding what world you're in. It's like a sorting hat, or so to speak, or a sorting mechanism that you are electing to use that's actually going to sort you energy world by energy world through your life path, essentially. Through your complicated, loop-de-loop highway of a life path. Which of course is super, super important because we all do have different paths, missions, and soul trajectories. And you can't really know what another person's life path is or is meant to be. We try to help each other, and we certainly want everyone to reach greater levels of understanding, but you have to be conscious at the same time of the huge diversity and variety of these paths. There are probably as many of them as, birds in the sky, for example. But hold on a second. We're saying that there might be actually legitimate reasons, quote unquote, for a person to want to live and incarnate here in this world full of deception and cruelty and suffering without knowing about it. I mean, from the awake point of view, right, this seems completely mad. Why would you want to do that? Let's remember, right, what place are we talking about here? What planet are we on, right? We're dealing with planets, the planet that has this, that has this. These are a few examples of, right, let's get back down to earth here. What are we talking about? What's going on? Why would someone want to be here in this place that has so much pain and suffering, and then also being unaware of that? Like, it doesn't make sense, right? What gain could you get from that? Well, I don't think we need to answer all of that specifically, because that is basically culture and art and philosophy and everything devoted to answering that question on an overt and on a more esoteric level, right? But I think what's important here is to remember about how people behave every day. And this is going to lead us, keeping this in mind is going to lead us to really a greater understanding, because it's bringing up this whole question now of every time we do engage with something, does it have to be real? And in what way can it be real? And what does reality mean in that sense? And that's what we're going to talk about with the intersection of possibility and morality.